Imagine a man who walks into a crowded party, shakes a few hands, exchanges some pleasantries, and then something shifts. Over the following weeks, his responses get slower. His presence becomes rarer. His social media goes quiet. He stops showing up to gatherings. He doesn't announce his departure. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't seek permission. He simply vanishes from the social landscape like smoke dissolving into air. Most people call this antisocial, rude, even cowardly. Friedrich Nietzsche called it something else entirely, the ultimate expression of personal sovereignty. Because what these disappearing men understand, and what drives everyone else insane, is a truth that Nietzsche spent his entire life exploring. The herd needs you more than you need the herd, and the moment you realize this, everything changes. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But here's what Nietzsche understood that most people don't. Sometimes the most powerful why is learning to live without the constant validation, opinion, and presence of others. Most men are terrified of this. They'd rather suffer through soul-crushing social obligations than face a single weekend alone with their thoughts. They'd rather maintain friendships that drain them than risk the discomfort of solitude. They'd rather perform connection than admit they've outgrown the connections they have. But the man who disappears has crossed a threshold that most never reach. He's discovered something far more valuable than social approval. He's discovered himself. And that discovery is so threatening to the social order that people will do everything in their power to pull him back into the fold. Not because they miss him, because his absence reveals an uncomfortable truth. They're more trapped than they realized. Walk into any social gathering, and you'll see the same pattern playing out in real time. Groups of people who've known each other for years, maybe decades, locked in the same conversations, rehashing the same topics, maintaining the same dynamics. They talk about their plans but never execute them. They complain about their circumstances but never change them. They discuss their dreams but never pursue them. And if you listen closely, really listen, you'll notice something disturbing. Nobody's actually saying anything. It's all performance. Social theater designed to maintain the illusion of connection without the risk of actual intimacy or the discomfort of genuine growth. Nietzsche called this the morality of custom, the unconscious tyranny of the group over the individual. And here's where it gets interesting. When one person in this dynamic suddenly disappears, when someone breaks the script and stops showing up, the entire system panics. Why? Because his absence forces everyone else to confront a question they've been avoiding. Why am I here? What am I actually getting from these interactions? Am I choosing this or am I just following the pattern? The disappearing man isn't asking these questions anymore. He's already answered them. And his answer was decisive. This isn't serving me. These connections aren't feeding my growth. This social ecosystem isn't aligned with who I'm becoming. So he leaves. Not with announcement, not with drama, not with explanation. He just starts saying no. No to invitations that feel like obligations. No to conversations that go nowhere. No to relationships that exist purely out of habit. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think the man who disappears is running away. Nietzsche would say he's running toward something, toward silence, toward depth, toward the kind of focused intensity that's impossible to achieve when you're constantly managing other people's expectations and emotions. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. But you can't access that chaos, that creative turbulence, when you're surrounded by people who need you to remain predictable, comfortable, and available. The herd doesn't want your transformation. The herd wants your consistency, your predictability, your continued participation in the social scripts everyone's been following. Because when you change, you implicitly challenge everyone else to examine whether they should change too. And most people would rather resent your growth than do the uncomfortable work of pursuing their own. This is why the disappearing man faces such intense social pressure. Friends suddenly become concerned about his well-being. Family members question his mental state. Acquaintances spread rumors about what he's really doing. Why? Because his absence creates a void that everyone projects their own fears onto. He must be depressed. He must be arrogant, he must be going through something. The idea that he might simply be choosing himself, that he might be prioritizing his own development over social maintenance, that he might have found something more compelling than their company, this possibility is too threatening to consider. So they create narratives that protect them from having to face the uncomfortable truth. He didn't outgrow us. He's just struggling. He's not choosing differently, he's just confused. He's not pursuing growth. He's just being selfish. Nietzsche saw through this immediately. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. The tribe doesn't use physical force anymore. It uses guilt. It uses obligation. It uses the language of concern to mask its own insecurity. But the man who truly disappears isn't moved by these tactics because he's discovered something they haven't. The opinion of people who don't know what they want from their own lives is worthless. And here's the part that really drives people crazy. The disappearing man becomes more interesting in his absence than he ever was in his presence. Before, he was just another face in the crowd, another voice in the conversation, another person fulfilling social expectations. Now he's a mystery. People who barely noticed him before suddenly can't stop talking about him. Where is he? What's he doing? Why isn't he responding? This isn't because they genuinely care. This is because his absence reveals their own emptiness. When your identity is built on social validation, on constant connection, on being plugged into the network, someone who unplugs and thrives threatens your entire worldview. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, all this social energy you're investing isn't as necessary as you thought. Maybe you're not connecting. Maybe you're just distracting yourself. And that possibility is terrifying. Nietzsche put it perfectly. The snake which cannot cast its skin has to die. New opinions are acquired, new skin is formed, and the old skin must be shed. But most people would rather keep wearing dead skin than face the vulnerability of transformation. The disappearing man has shed that skin. He's in the uncomfortable, raw phase of growth where everything feels uncertain and exposed. He can't be around people who are going to pull him back into his old patterns. He can't engage with relationships that reinforce who he used to be, rather than supporting who he's becoming. So he creates distance. Not forever. Not necessarily with hostility, but intentionally, strategically, with the understanding that some seasons of life require isolation. Some growth can only happen in solitude. Some transformations can only occur when you remove yourself from the environment that shaped the version of you that you're trying to outgrow. By the way, speaking of transformation and growth, I'm curious, what city are you watching this from right now? Drop your location in the comments. I love seeing where this message is landing and connecting with people all over the world who are on this same journey of intentional evolution. Now here's where the dark power really starts to reveal itself. While everyone else is busy being offended by his absence, the disappearing man is doing something they can't even imagine. He's building, in silence. Without audience, without validation, without the constant feedback loop of social approval and disapproval. He's reading books that challenge everything he thought he knew. He's developing skills that compound over time. He's thinking thoughts that require hours of uninterrupted focus. He's creating work that demands depth rather than performance. He's becoming someone who doesn't need to announce what he's doing, because the results will speak louder than any social media update ever could. This is what Nietzsche meant when he talked about the Superman. Not some genetically enhanced human, but someone who has overcome the need for herd approval. Someone who has transcended the social games that keep most people perpetually distracted. Someone who has found the courage to define success on their own terms, rather than accepting the definitions handed down by a culture that produces mediocrity and calls it achievement. But becoming this person requires something most people aren't willing to give: time alone. Long stretches of it, days, weeks, months, where you're not performing for anyone, where you're not managing relationships, where you're not maintaining your social presence, where you're just with yourself, your thoughts, your work, and the uncomfortable questions that only surface in silence. And silence is exactly what most people are running from. They'll do anything to avoid it. They'll scroll endlessly through feeds of strangers' lives, rather than spend an hour examining their own. They'll maintain friendships that feel hollow, rather than risk a weekend without plans. They'll say yes to social obligations they resent, rather than face the judgment that comes with saying no. Why? Because somewhere along the way, they learned to fear their own company. They learned that being alone means something's wrong, that isolation equals failure, that if you're not constantly connected, constantly busy, constantly available, you must be broken somehow. Nietzsche called this the herd instinct, and he saw it as the primary obstacle to human excellence. Not because connection is bad, connection is essential, but because most of what passes for connection is actually just mutual distraction. People gathering together to avoid themselves. Relationships maintained not because they're meaningful, but because ending them would require confronting uncomfortable truths. Social networks expanded not because they add value, but because there's a fear of missing out on something that probably isn't worth experiencing anyway. The disappearing man has broken this pattern. He's discovered that missing out is often the best decision you can make. That saying no to good opportunities creates space for great ones. That the relationships worth keeping don't require constant maintenance. They survive distance because they're built on something deeper than habit and proximity. He's learned what Nietzsche tried to teach, that the earth has a skin, and that skin has diseases. One of those diseases is called man. But the cure isn't misanthropy. The cure is discernment, learning to distinguish between relationships that elevate you and relationships that diminish you, between social engagement that energizes you and social engagement that drains you, between connection that challenges you to grow and connection that rewards you for staying comfortable. Most people never develop this discernment because they never create enough distance to see clearly. They're so embedded in their social ecosystem that they can't distinguish between their own thoughts and the thoughts everyone around them agrees are correct. They're so conditioned by the expectations of their environment that they've forgotten they have the right to form new expectations. They're so identified with their role in various social groups that they've lost touch with who they are when nobody's watching. The disappearing man is rediscovering that person. And it's uncomfortable, confusing, sometimes lonely. But it's also liberating in a way that people who've never done it can't understand. For the first time maybe ever, he's making decisions based on what he actually wants, rather than what he thinks he should want. He's pursuing interests that genuinely fascinate him rather than interests that make him seem interesting to others. He's building a life that feels authentic rather than a life that looks impressive from the outside. And this authenticity is magnetic in a way that social performance never is. Because when you're living from genuine desire rather than social obligation, people sense it. Not everyone. Most people will be confused or offended. But the right people, the people who are on their own journey of intentional growth, the people who understand that transformation requires isolation, those people will recognize what you're doing, and they'll respect it. Not with words necessarily, but with understanding. With space, with the recognition that some journeys can't be explained until they're complete. Nietzsche knew this. He spent years in isolation, battling illness, rejection, and the constant pressure to return to academic life and social acceptability. But he refused. He kept writing, kept thinking, kept pushing into territory that made everyone uncomfortable. And he died in obscurity, convinced he'd failed. But his ideas didn't die with him. They spread. They transformed philosophy. They influenced generations of thinkers who came after him. Why? Because he had the courage to disappear from the social world that wanted him to be something he wasn't, and build something in solitude that would outlive them all. This is the dark power of disappearing. You trade short-term social approval for long-term personal sovereignty. You exchange comfortable belonging for uncomfortable growth. You give up the shallow satisfaction of being known by many for the deep satisfaction of being understood by yourself. And most people never make this trade because the cost seems too high. What will people think? What will I miss out on? What if I'm making a mistake? But these questions reveal the problem. When your primary concern is what other people think, you're not living your life. You're performing a version of your life for an audience that isn't even paying attention. They're too busy performing their own lives for an audience that isn't paying attention to them. It's performance all the way down. A vast ecosystem of people pretending to be interested in each other's performances while secretly wondering why none of it feels meaningful. The disappearing man has stopped performing, and that's why his absence feels so loud. In a world of constant noise, silence is radical. In a culture of endless availability, boundaries are rebellion. In a society that equates your worth with your social capital, choosing solitude is an act of revolution. But here's what makes it dark. The power that comes from disappearing isn't the power to control others. It's the power to not need to control others. It's not the power to be admired. It's the power to not require admiration. It's not the power to be important in other people's lives. It's the power to be important in your own life. This inverts the entire social hierarchy. In normal society, power flows to those who are most connected, most visible, most approved of. But the disappearing man has discovered a different source of power. The power that comes from not needing what everyone else is fighting over. He doesn't need your attention because he's cultivated his own focus. He doesn't need your approval because he's developed his own standards. He doesn't need your validation because he's built genuine confidence that comes from capability rather than consensus. And this makes him dangerous. Not dangerous in the sense that he'll harm anyone. Dangerous in the sense that he can't be controlled by the usual social mechanisms. You can't guilt him into showing up because he's made peace with disappointing people. You can't manipulate him with FOMO because he's learned that missing out often feels better than showing up. You can't leverage his need for belonging because he's discovered something more valuable than belonging. Autonomy, the ability to choose his own direction. The freedom to build a life according to his own vision, rather than inheriting a life template from a culture that produces more depression and anxiety than it does genuine fulfillment. Nietzsche called this becoming who you are, and he recognized that most people never achieve it, not because they're incapable, but because they're unwilling to pay the price. The price is isolation, temporary, intentional, strategic isolation where you create enough distance from your conditioned patterns to discover who you actually are underneath all the social programming. Where you generate enough silence to hear your own thoughts instead of the echo chamber of collective opinion. Where you develop enough autonomy to make choices based on genuine desire rather than social expectation. And this process is absolutely brutal for most people. Because when you remove social validation, when you turn off the feedback loop of likes and comments and approval, when you stop using relationships as a distraction from yourself, you're left with something terrifying. Yourself, your real thoughts, your actual desires, your genuine feelings, your unedited personality, all the parts of you that you've been suppressing to fit in, to be likable, to maintain social harmony, all the parts that don't match the image you've been projecting. All the contradictions and complexities that make you actually interesting, but also make you harder to categorize. Most people take one look at this and run back to the comfort of social distraction. Better to be acceptable than authentic. Better to be liked than real. Better to belong to a group that limits you than risk standing alone in your full complexity. But the man who disappears is making a different calculation. He's deciding that authenticity is worth isolation. That growth is worth discomfort. That becoming who you actually are is worth losing people who only liked who you were pretending to be. And this isn't about being antisocial. This isn't about hating people or rejecting connection. This is about refusing to build your life on a foundation of social obligation rather than genuine choice. About refusing to let other people's expectations determine your direction. About refusing to waste your finite time and energy maintaining relationships that don't serve anyone's growth, including the other person's. Because here's what most people don't want to admit. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave. Not with hostility, not with judgment, but with the recognition that you're growing in different directions, and holding on is preventing both of you from becoming who you need to become. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop pretending. Stop showing up out of obligation. Stop maintaining connections that feel hollow. Stop performing enthusiasm you don't feel. Not because you're mean, but because continuing the performance is lying. And that lie wastes everyone's time. The disappearing man has stopped lying. He's stopped pretending he's interested when he's not. He's stopped saying yes when he means no. He's stopped maintaining the comfortable fiction that everything's fine when everything isn't fine. And this honesty is brutal. It offends people. It creates discomfort. It forces everyone to reevaluate assumptions they'd rather not question. But it's also the only path to actual growth. You cannot become something new while maintaining all the patterns of the old. You cannot transform while keeping everyone comfortable with your current form. You cannot evolve while remaining available to people who need you to stay the same. Nietzsche understood this completely. Without music, life would be a mistake. But he also understood that sometimes you need to turn off all external music to finally hear the melody that's been trying to emerge from inside you. That melody can't compete with the noise of constant social engagement. It can't develop while you're managing everyone else's emotional needs. It can't mature while you're performing a personality designed to make others comfortable. So the disappearing man turns down the volume on everything external and turns up the volume on everything internal. He stops asking, what will people think, and starts asking, what do I actually want? He stops wondering how this will be perceived and starts wondering, is this true for me? He stops concerning himself with whether this is acceptable and starts concerning himself with whether this is authentic. And gradually, something remarkable happens. He becomes more himself. Not the self he was taught to be. Not the self that's easiest for others to handle. Not the self that fits neatly into expected categories. The self that emerges when all the social conditioning is stripped away. The self that exists before you learned what was impressive. The self that remains after you stop caring what's acceptable. The self that Nietzsche called your demon, your authentic nature, your real will. This is the power that comes from disappearing, not power over others, power over yourself, the power to direct your own attention, the power to choose your own values, the power to build your own meaning in a world that constantly tries to impose its meaning on you. And once you have this power, everything changes. You're no longer available for manipulation because you're no longer seeking approval. You're no longer vulnerable to guilt because you're no longer operating from obligation. You're no longer controllable through social pressure because you're no longer measuring your worth by social metrics. This terrifies the herd because the herd's power depends on everyone continuing to care what the herd thinks. The moment someone genuinely stops caring, genuinely builds their own value system, genuinely finds meaning outside of social validation, they become impossible to control, not because they're rebellious, but because they're indifferent. They're not fighting against the system. They've just built something better and quietly left. This is the ultimate power move, not opposition, evolution, not rebellion, transcendence, not fighting the herd, simply outgrowing the need for it. And here's the beautiful irony that Nietzsche would appreciate. The man who disappears to find himself eventually returns. But he returns different. He returns with boundaries that weren't there before, with standards that weren't there before, with clarity that wasn't there before. He returns selective about his time, intentional about his relationships, strategic about his energy. He returns as someone who knows the difference between connection and distraction, between relationships that elevate and relationships that diminish, between social engagement that serves growth and social engagement that prevents it. And when he returns, the right people recognize the change. Not everyone. Most people will be confused why he's not as available as he used to be, why he doesn't say yes as easily, why he's more selective, why he's less concerned with being liked. But the people who matter, the people who are on their own journey, will understand. They'll recognize that he's not being distant. He's being intentional. He's not being cold. He's being authentic. He's not being antisocial. He's being sovereign. This recognition creates connections far deeper than anything he had before, because they're no longer built on habit or obligation. They're built on genuine resonance, on shared values, on mutual respect for each other's growth. on understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is give someone space to become who they need to become. And this brings us full circle to Nietzsche's ultimate insight. One must have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star. The disappearing man chose chaos, chose uncertainty, chose the discomfort of not knowing who he'd be on the other side. And through that chaos, he discovered something the herd never finds: his own dancing star, his own unique expression, his own authentic power. Not power that needs to be performed, not strength that needs to be proven, but quiet certainty that comes from knowing yourself deeply and building a life that reflects that knowledge. This is the dark power of men who disappear. They trade temporary comfort for permanent growth. They exchange social approval for personal sovereignty. They give up being understood by everyone to be understood by themselves. And in that exchange, they discover what most people spend their entire lives searching for: freedom. Real freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to become who you actually are, without permission, without approval, without explanation. Just the courage to disappear when necessary and return transformed. Now I want to know something. This journey of disappearing to find yourself, this path of choosing growth over comfort, authenticity over approval. Have you taken it? Are you in the middle of it right now? Drop a comment and write this exact phrase: I choose myself over comfort. Write that in the comments right now. Not because I need you to, but because declaring it publicly, even anonymously, creates accountability. It marks a line in the sand. It's your way of telling yourself that you're serious about this transformation. And here's what happens next. You hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Not because you need more content, because this journey requires consistent reinforcement. The herd is loud. The social pressure is constant. You need reminders that choosing yourself isn't selfish, that boundaries aren't mean, that transformation requires isolation, that the path you're on is worth the temporary loneliness. This channel is your reminder. These videos are your reinforcement. This community is your proof that you're not alone in choosing to be alone. Subscribe now, because what's coming next will shift everything you thought you knew about personal power. The next video reveals something even darker, something even more powerful, something the greatest minds discovered but most people never implement. You cannot afford to miss it. This is your path. This is your power. This is your time to disappear and transform. Everything you need is already inside you. Now go find it.